What do you put this down to when you look at the sadistic attack, as Julie and Lisa put it very appropriately in our discussion earlier and in the AFR today? It was a sadistic attack.
It was.
From Hamas last year. And then you should expect solidarity, a wave of support, not a wave of anti-Semitism.
I think that's exactly right. It was, to be clear, October the 7th wasn't a military operation. It was an organised massacre of Jews.
Horrific.
And in the worst loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, but conducted in a way with, unfathomable cruelty and desire to inflict punishment, humiliation, fear, degradation, torture. So the malevolence behind it was so shocking. And I think just as, I've been around and remember the Bali terrorist bombings when 88 Australians were killed and 202 people died, September the 11th, of course, and at the times of both of those tragedies, the outpouring of sympathy was across the board and uniform. And Jewish Australians have felt that there was perhaps 12 to 18 hours of sympathy before the mood, if you like, or at least the activist mood within the country turned on them and sought to blame the victims in some sense. And, we saw that whether it was the Opera House protests 2 days afterwards or what we're seeing today. You can certainly take to the streets and mourn the loss of Palestinian or Lebanese civilian life. I have no difficulty with that. But this is a day when so many Jews lost their lives in such a barbaric fashion. I think this day should be recognised as their day to mourn those losses, not to be hijacked by people trying to deliver another political message.
And there's also the clarity that was put by Dennis Richardson in Josh Frydenberg's documentary, where he said, essentially, if this happened to Australia, we would follow the perpetrators to every end of the earth, essentially, and get them and have retribution. And this would be any nation, any democracy, any country.
Absolutely.
If this was perpetrated upon your country.
Yes. You wouldn't. No, exactly. You're not going to accommodate them and say, well, you'll stay there and we'll stay here. Of course, you'd be trying to get back your hostages if we had Australian hostages taken. And of course, you would be seeking to make sure that this could never happen again. You'd be seeking to degrade, disrupt, destroy the military network, the ideological apparatus that sits behind it, the support that's provided by foreign nations, whatever it takes. And we did something quite similar after the Bali bombings. Close cooperation with the Indonesian authorities, but the Australian Federal Police helped track down the masterminds, the technical engineers, the ideological avatars of Jemaah Islamiyah, the terrorist movement at the time. We worked closely with the Indonesian government to make sure this movement no longer had political space. We effectively sought to eliminate that threat. And Israel, any nation would do the same. That is what Israel is seeking to do.
Your colleague, Julian Lisa, said he agrees with Josh Frydenberg when he says that he believes the government has abandoned Israel at its time of need. Do you agree with that assessment, given the government has said it supports Israel's right to defend itself?
I don't think they've been sincere in those statements of support. I think effectively they have abandoned Israel, not only a country with whom we have long-standing relations and deep historical ties, but a country with whom we share a lot of values and interests. And whilst they've been careful in what they've said publicly, they have failed to support Israel at the United Nations, where Australia's voice carries weight. They've failed to support Israel in conducting what is still a war of self-defence. They've failed to recognise that Israel has a right to respond to either Iranian ballistic missiles or Hezbollah rockets or ongoing Hamas terrorism. I think we've let them down quite deeply. And, countries are not just emotional entities.
Why do you say that, though, in terms of the Iranian and the Hezbollah response? Well, because you argue they're not sincere, but they have said Israel has a right to defend itself.
They did. Firstly, they took some time to reach that position. Their immediate call was for de-escalation and a ceasefire, which is fanciful when you're dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran or Hezbollah. But also, whenever they talk about, it's like when they talk about anti-Semitism, they can't mention anti-Semitism without also uttering the phrase Islamophobia. Now, the two are not happening in commensurate volumes at the moment. Nor can they talk about Israel's right to self-defence without immediately issuing caveats with it. But it must be proportional, but they need to exercise restraint, or how Israel defends itself matters. Now, they're not illegitimate views to have, but to always be putting that forward in your public messaging effectively means, and that it's interpreted as such in Israel, that Australia doesn't have their back, that we're scrutinising their conduct very closely, that if we can find fault with them, we will. I mean, let me just give you one example. There was one Australian killed by those Hamas terrorist attacks on the
grandmother.
Yeah, Galit Carbone. Australia condemned the death, as it should, but we didn't appoint a special commission of inquiry to understand how this happened. We didn't send a senior former chief of the Defence Forces to go in and conduct an investigation. When another Australian was killed in tragic circumstances, Zomi Francon, World Central Kitchen, the government pulled a former ADF chief of staff, ADF commander, out of retirement, sent him to Israel, got him to turn the place upside down, finding out how this happened. He delivered a very comprehensive report which effectively recognised that Israel was conducting its war by lawful means, that this was a tragic error but not the result of deliberate intent. But the foreign minister chose to verbal his report and basically say Israel was in the wrong here.
Do you believe it's double standards on that?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, you don't hear this government talk about Hezbollah's crimes or Hamas's crimes or Iran's crimes. You always hear them talk about Israel's conduct in this war. And Israel is not an isolated actor here. There are multiple parties to this conflict, each of which has moral agency.
Former Ambassador to Israel, Liberal Senator Dave Sharma, thanks.
Thanks so much, Kieran.
Appreciate it.